Psalm 133 has an opening line that is perhaps the best known line for Jews in the whole of the 150 Psalms, because it's a sung line in camp, in religious school, in synagogue, and as we do, Hinei Mah Tov manai, my hands naturally go out as if I'm putting my arms on the people next to me. That opening line of Psalm 133 of behold how good and how pleasant is the dwelling of siblings also together, that warmth, that sense of embrace, is the opening of what is only a 3-verse psalm. And so today and tomorrow, our psalms are short, only 3 verses, and they are the concluding psalms of the Psalms of Ascent that began with Psalm 120. We'll conclude tomorrow with Psalm 134. These Psalms of Ascent are a unit. We don't know regarding any one of those Psalms when it was composed, what was the prompt, but what they share in common is a title, Shir HaMa'alot, Songs of Ascents. They're identified with pilgrimage, though they don't all necessarily focus on pilgrimage. They often have the link of Zion, looking toward Jerusalem, which will be true in today's psalm as well. There's also a stylistic similarity, and that there's a repetition of words that creates, if you will, steps. You'll see in the psalm in a moment that the word tov, good, links verses 1 and 2, and the word yored, coming down, and the word ki, which here means like, is also in verses 2 and 3. So the composition is that of repeated words to create motion. One last dimension of these psalms is there's often a new word, a made-up word, or a very rare word, which we will see here at the center of the psalm as well. With that, let us look at Psalm 133, titled, because of that famous line, Pleasant is dwelling of siblings also together. Like all of our readings of Psalms, we're always aware that there is the pshat, the literal reading, and then the commentary, the homiletical, the midrash, the finding and reading into the psalm some meaning as well. In this case of this short translation, 2 things that I want to highlight that were part of the challenge. One is honing as closely as I could to the Hebrew itself. So in most translations, there are added thes, for instance. And also I was made aware even more in this translation how punctuation, which is not part of the Hebrew, is also a commentary, is something, where do you do the commas? Is it a period or a colon? Is also, how do you see the flow of the words? With that, Psalm 133. A song of ascents of David. Behold, how good and how pleasant is dwelling of siblings, also together. Like the good oil upon the head descending upon the beard, Aaron's beard that descends upon mouth of his tunic, like dew of Hermon that descends on the mountains of Zion. For there demands Adonai the blessing, life until forever. That's it, a very short psalm. And yet there is so much to say about these words. And so we're not clear as to what prompted the writing of this psalm. Was it celebration, exhortation, or a description of a future ideal? Adin Steinsaltz, who I always take seriously for his enormous achievement in the translation of the Talmud and commentary there and on other texts, he sees this psalm as written in Israel during a period of tranquility. As you can imagine, a Levite celebrating the goodness of the time in which he lives. In contrast, Martin Cohen, who has a book, Translations of Psalms, sees the psalm very differently. He sees it as an exhortation of an unhappy Levite, a Levite who is saying to his co-workers, why can't we just get along? That's possible. And the traditional commentary, like the Mitsuda, that little book that I like so much, their introduction says that this psalm is written about the future, a messianic era, a hope, a promise. So once again, we don't know what prompted this psalm, who wrote it. We do have this identification with David, but again, we don't know if it was written during his time or later. And now that famous line, Hinei, behold, Mah Tov, how good, Umah Naim, and how pleasant, Shevet, dwelling, Achim, of siblings, and in the Shevet, the Tuf is of, the dwelling of siblings, Gam Yachad, also together. So now moving from Pshat, the literal reading, to some commentary. And a starting point for commentary is that there are no superfluous words. Adin Steinsaltz, who once again saw this as a hymn during a period of tranquility, he circles the word ma, what or how, as he says, quiet rapture. There's a sense of surprise, of delight. Ma tov, how good. Umah naim, how pleasant. Sometimes, and some commentators will see tov and naim as synonyms, repeated for emphasis. Others, commentators, will see them as separate qualities, so that tov is identified with needed or effective, and naim is pleasant. So they will say in this later commentary, a Hasidic commentary, tov can be medicine. It's good for you. It's effective, but it doesn't taste good. It's not naim. It's not pleasurable in how it's experienced immediately. In this case, what's being celebrated is that all is both well and pleasurable. When? Shevet Achim, there is the dwelling of Achim. Now, who are these Achim? Here too, ambiguity. Literally, Achim means brothers. It can refer to many kinds of familial relationship. It might be, some scholars say, about the longing for the north of Israel and the south of Israel to be united again. Here in verse 3, we have Hermon, which is in the north, and Sion, Zion in the south. That could be dimension of the Achim. It could be bringing together David and Aaron in verses 1 and 2, namely the king, the monarchy, with the priests who didn't always get along. It could be referring to an idyllic past, a nostalgic past of Moses and Aaron. Here again, Aaron in verse 2, who were two brothers that shared power, finding support for each other. And of course, Achim in its more immediate level can be understood as family, clan, the nation, or as some will do it, the whole of humanity. Gam Yachad, also together. Many translations, like King James Version, ignore the word gam, which is a simple Hebrew word that means also. It's superfluous. It could be how pleasant it is when brothers are together. Why also together? And again, whenever there is an added word, that is a prompt for commentary. Already Rashi in the 11th century of France will say that it refers to God. Gam Yachad, meaning also God is together. So when Israel is dwelling united, God also joins with them. And that's already Rashi. The Zohar will pick up on that. And again, modern scholars will see the Zohar written after Rashi. On its own terms, in a traditional mode, the Zohar is written in Israel in the 2nd century by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. No, in that regard, a story from the Talmud of Shimon Bar Yochai. And that is, there was a drought in the land. And the people came to him and they say, Rabbi Shimon, who was known for his miracle powers, do something for us. And in the story in the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai repeats verse 1, how pleasant it is for the people to be together, and then God will be with them, and that brought rain. So there, verse 1 in the Zohar, in the Talmud, that's in the Talmud, is used as a mystical incantation. In the Zohar, the Achim, the brothers, is here. Now, this is going to go a little bit more to another place of commentary. Achim is identified with the two cherubs that were above the Holy Ark. They were known as identical twins. They were similar. It will say about the two of them that ufnehem ish el achiv, Exodus 25:20. Their faces were one to the other. And Yoma 54a in the Talmud will say that when the cherubs were facing each other in harmony, then that reflected God's relationship with Israel. And when Israel and God were at odds, the two cherubs, the Talmud will say, faced apart. And so the Zohar says, here's a description of how good and how pleasant it is when the Shevet Achim, when the cherubs are together, for back to God, and that comment of Rashi, that will reflect that also God is united with the people of Israel. And now back to Pshat, back to the surface readings of 2 and 3. There are two metaphors used for what flows out of this quality of unity of the siblings. Like the good oil upon the head descending upon the beard, Aaron's beard that descends upon mouth of his tunic, like dew of Hermon that descends on the mountains of Zion. So 2 and 3 have a motion, a movement from up down. And the psalm will conclude with blessing, that last phrase of verse 3, as if blessing is descending. And so in verses 1, everybody is together. There's a quality of stasis, of harmony, of an enduring quality, which verse 3 will also hearken back to at the end. But in the middle, there's motion, a descent, and oil. The good oil, that phrase, is identified with the king and the priest. Both in the Bible are anointed with oil, fine oil. I'll add, that's an act of people doing to other people. It wasn't only in Israel, we know in Greece and other places, being luxuriated with oil was the experience of both luxury and empowerment. Even in England, the royalty are anointed, the use of oil. That is where the word Mashiach comes from, Messiah, as the king would be anointed. And so the good oil, Shemen HaTov, and we see in Exodus that the oil that was used for inauguration was mixed with perfume. It was an oil that was scented and placed on the head, and it would come down on the beard. Now the shift to Aaron in the second half of verse 2. Here, Aaron's beard that descends upon Pi Midotav, the mouth of his tunic. We're frankly not clear in the second half of 2 what's coming down. Is it the oil dripping down, or is it Aaron's beard in its fullness that is coming down? A beard, a symbol of virility, of even youthfulness, in a fullness of beard coming down, or it could be the oil, ambiguity. Al pi midotav, the word pi means mouth. Midotav is an unusual word. Some translate it as vestments, others as robe, King James Version as skirts. Here's what I found interesting. The word pi again means literally mouth or here. It comes down to the opening of his clothes. Some understand the opening to be the top, the collar, others the bottom, the hem. In fact, Radak will say that midotav, this unusual word, is mido, his measure, bad, of his garment. And the art scroll will say that the hem needed to be precisely measured on the garment of the priest. Hence, they translate midotav as hem versus most of, which also are, King James has skirts. Most contemporary, like the like Benjamin Siegel, will do it as collar. But back to the image. The image is descending. And what is it just beneath the opening, at least on the top? That is where the priest had the Urim Vitumim, that breastplate that had the 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And also the Ouija board, the Urim Vitumim, would be the way to discern God's will. And so the image of verse 2, close to the surface, but still a bit homiletical, is that as the oil descends or the beard descends, it links to verse 1, the image of the 12 on that Urim Vitumim together, and the image of God dwelling among them, also the Urim Vitumim. Like verse 3, like dew of Hermon that descends. Now, Mount Hermon is among the highest mountains in Israel. It's in the north. It's where today there is skiing in the winter. The one mountain with the chairlift in Israel is Mount Hermon. Medieval commentators like Radak will point to its height, being among the tallest mountains in Israel, and say that Hermon represents a closeness to God. The image of dew on Mount Hermon can be used homiletically in a variety of ways. Dew, as in Micah, the prophet, will be used as an image of God making the people of the land like dew, Micah 5:6, in which the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many peoples, like dew from the Lord, ... mortals will place their hope only in God. And so here, back to this being futuristic, the dew of Hermon can also be understood as Israel, that descends on the Mount of Zion. Zion is dry. Literally, the word Sion has as its origin dryness. And so there's a contrast between the Hermon and the mountains of Zion, dry and moist. Literally, the mountains of Hermon do not feed into Jerusalem. And so there the image could be simply poetic. It's not literal. But the dew of Hermon, another play on the image, is that just like the moisture of Hermon creates greenery all around it, so Zion, in its closeness to God, will create a spirit around it. And then for there, Kisham, there's probably Zion, Jerusalem. And that links back to the opening of this being a Shir HaMa'alot. We can imagine these words being chanted with the pilgrims gathered on the Temple Mount. For there, and here I, at the last moment, changed my translation to tzivah as commands rather than commanded. And others will translate tzivah, which usually means commanded, to conferred or ordained. For there, coming down, back to the image we saw in 2 and 3, it's as if coming down from either Mount Zion or even more, coming down from heaven, commands Adonai habracha, the blessing. And if you take the image of the pilgrims in the courtyard, every day there, the priests, the descendants of Aaron, will bless the people with the threefold blessing of Numbers chapter 6, verses 25 to 27. And those blessings, as you know, those threefold 15 words deal with calling for God to bless the people, being done through the priests, and blessing them here as life, ad ha'olam, until forever. And again, I choose to translate it more literally, which includes the word ad, which means until. Usually that will drop in an English translation, so that may be blessed for life everlasting. And that phrase, ad olam, also has a variety of understandings. It can be, may it be enduring, life and stability, back to the opening of how good it is and pleasant when siblings also dwell together. May that be enduring. And for others to circle back in a traditional mode, that can refer to the world to come. So may Adonai's blessing enable the Israel who dwell here on earth together, perpetuate that unity even into time eternal. At the center of this psalm is the word Aaron. Aaron is the first priest, Moses' brother. I mentioned earlier that Moses and Aaron, for the rabbis, have a model relationship of siblings, each with important roles of leadership without apparent jealousy. There's another quality of Aaron. It says, the rabbis say of Aaron, Ohev Shalom, V'rodev Shalom. Aaron loved peace and pursued peace. There will be midrashim, rabbinic stories of how Aaron was the peacemaker when there were disputes. In part, it's that loaded story of the golden calf where Aaron seems to be cooperating with the people as if to placate and stall. But later, rather than that being seen as a negative, the rabbis, and this may be early on in terms of how the Levites nostalgically looked to Aaron, and that is a symbol as peacemaker. And that image of Aaron as peacemaker is at the center of this psalm. As Aaron sought to bring together those who were even at odds with God, who were, if you will, in disputes with each other, so may we have Aaron at the center of our consciousness, with a sense of both what is received as gift, but two other contrasts, and that is the two metaphors are oil and dew. Oil is a product of partnership of people with God, as is farming. In contrast, dew is beyond our control. In antiquity, even more so. And so both metaphors come into play here. May there be a sense of bringing our best efforts combined with honoring what transcends our efforts as the blessings that are our lives, that point to the possibility of an enduring blessing from above upon us that circles back to the beginning to enable those who are ultimately achim, siblings, to also dwell together. As I opened, I must close to say that I have a heavy heart with the fighting, the terror, the uncertainties taking place in Israel and its neighbors, in Gaza and in the territories. And I read this psalm also all the more today with the recognition that Abraham and that the children of Abraham, that Yishmael was also a brother. And may it be so that these words read today amidst terror on all sides, of uncertainty, of bloodshed, may they give us hope of the possibilities, Ohev Shalom V'rodev Shalom, to love and pursue peace, which is embedded in the center of this psalm in the very name of Aaron. And so I stop the share to allow for some sharing. I want to leave space, of course, for Robert, Professor Allenson, and his wife, Irina, to share. But before we get to our honorees, is there a comment or two about Psalm 133? Chuck? Go
Yeah,
right
I'd
ahead.
like to share a story. In ancient history, when Louise and I were in Maryland, we spent about 25 years teaching new Boy Scout leaders. And one weekend course, the Sunday was an interfaith service. So we always taught the Harry Belafonte version of this. And so one weekend we taught this. Lady came up to us afterwards and said, "I'm Palestinian. I'm from Nazareth. My father used to sing this to me."
Mm, thank you, Chuck. And again, a reminder here's just one aside to be reminded of how these Psalms are more than Jewish. Augustine of Hippo, who lived in North Africa, probably today's Algeria, 4th, 5th century, pointed to verse 1 of this psalm as the foundation for monasteries, encouraging brothers to live together. That's one dimension of how this psalm, all psalms, ripple out in the larger world. But I love that story, Chuck, of both Harry Belafonte singing it and bringing a Palestinian and a Jew, in your case, together in the shared song. Shula?
This is about verse 2, the Aaron thing, which it's language, but I think it is particularly poignant after hearing what you said, how Aaron fits into today. And that is the last few words, al pi midotav. In Hebrew, the phrase al pi can also mean according to. And the word midot can also mean virtues.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, if we can look at this to say, the good oil on Aaron's head flowing down his beard, in fact, covering his whole body, just according to his incredible and wonderful virtues as the peacemaker, as the first priest, as this person whom you said had all these deep values. I think taking that translation gives it extra meaning too.
So I want to circle back to Shula's insight that in regard to, let me show everybody the phrase. In verse 2, it says that go down, the beard of Aaron, alpi, on the mouth of his tunic. But the word midot is character qualities, and you're in good company, Shula, to be sensitive to that. Already in the 16th, 17th century, the Maharsha, an important commentator on the Talmud, would translate this meaning according to his character traits. And so that's only to be reinforced that midotav may not only be a physical garment, it may be about inner qualities that will determine
Child, I got some stuff here.
that will determine the nature of the peace and the quality of peace. Just to say, it's not simple. Deidre, I paused before I call on you to celebrate with you. And that is, I can't keep track of days, but Friday, this last Friday, I had to participate as a sponsor for Deidre in front of her Beit Din. This past Friday, in anticipation of Shavuot, Deidre joined the Jewish people, and it was a great celebration. And the other rabbis who were listening to Deidre present her own story of her journey to Judaism commented on her essays that they were among the most learned Jewish essays that they had read by an applicant for conversion. So as Julia chats, as we all say, Mazal Tov and welcome, Deidre.
Thank you. big Ruth energy this week for sure. You guys were so warm, and I was so blessed to be able to sit with you all, and my heart is very full. But I love what you were drawing together with what Shula said about garments being also representative of your inner character. It's the other verse, he has wrapped me with a robe of righteousness. He has clothed me with the garment of salvation. That's another tie-in. You know, you're talking about the unity between heaven and earth, between God and man, between priesthood and the common people. I read verse 1 this morning, and in contrast to some of the commentators who said that Gam was extraneous, I felt it was making a point that you don't have brothers that are just next to each other. They're not just living next to each other. They're Yachad. They're one. They're unified. And that is Mah Tov. That is Manaim. That is beautiful. It's pleasant. It's good. It's not just that you coexist with someone, you're unified with them. And that goodness and that pleasantness, it's like the dripping of oil and the dripping of dew, and it gives life. And you see that blessing for life in the last verse. And that phrase, brothers dwelling together, that's almost exactly word for word from Deuteronomy, where it talks about the brothers and one of them passes and doesn't have a son. And I thought about how the other surviving brother goes in to help produce a son to give life and perpetuate the life of that family. And, you know, bringing all of that together, that blessing for life, that was really, really powerful to me when I read that this morning.
Thank you, Deidre. And again, with fullness of heart, we welcome you to the Jewish people. And to emphasize Deidre's intertwining of the physical and the inner as a prayer, that, as you were speaking, Deidre, pointed to Psalms, looking to the future in another way, and that is as prayer. This can be read as a prayer. How wonderful it would only be if brothers and sisters could dwell together. And as you emphasized, Deidre, not just physically as neighbors, but truly living with a quality of feeling each other as a blessing in one's life. And in a time as we are in this very moment of terror, of fear, of war, we can read today's words as longing. And in that regard, I'm going to now turn over to Professor Allenson, to Robert, and to Irina. But before I do, just a closing thought. Tomorrow when I do Psalm 134, which is the last of the Psalms of Ascent, the focus will be on let us bless God. And here we end today with, for their commands, Adonai, the blessing. And a reminder that the word blessing, and tomorrow I'll focus in what does it mean to bless God. But the word blessing has as its cognate, its root, the words for knees, meaning humility, and for pool of water, which is the abundance of life. And that when we pray, we are constantly using the word bracha. Sometimes we use it as praise, but often it's blessed. And at the core of prayer is this quality of humility and longing for the flow of life. And all the more in this moment of, again, war in the Middle East, Israel under attack, Israel attacking. It is a time for prayer that there be harmony, gam yachad, also together. Robert and Irina, I spoke briefly to Irina before because I hadn't had the chance to talk to Irina before. I was delighted to know that Irina is a psychotherapist, has done work in Asia and America. Robert is a professor currently at SOCA, a professor of philosophy, done much writing on metaphysics. I had the privilege recently to present about Judaism to one of Robert's classes, and it was by Zoom with students from all over the world. It was just a marvel of the kind of privilege that Professor Allenson has in bringing together such diversity and sharing big ideas, the ideas of philosophy, metaphysics, ethics. And so with that, our honorees, Robert and Irina, have been regulars on Psalms, often behind a screensaver. It's nice to see the two of you. Closing words from each of you, if you'd like.
Can you unmute? Okay, let's see, I'm unmuted. Unmute. I'm not
Yeah,
unmuted.
you're fine, Robert. I can hear you.
Oh, good. All right, yeah. Well, and both of us feel very blessed to be in this group. And I think that the group itself and what we talk about, what Rabbi in particular talks about, really exemplifies what's said in the Psalm. It's like how to be together in the way Deirdre said, and congratulations, Deirdre. A very beautiful account you gave. In unified, not just together, but unified together. And Rabbi, how you compared that to the two brothers, Ishmael and I think that and Isaac, and I think that really is a key point. Having said all that, just to give you a little tiny bit about myself, I've also been a senior fellow at Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I have a particular interest in the Holocaust, and I've been a fellow at the Institute for Holocaust Research at Yad Vashem.
And may I say, he is the first philosopher who was ever selected at Yad Vashem to be one of the fellows there. Most of it is, as you know, historically oriented. So his interest is very deeply in the ethics and values that I think that need to be elaborated upon, especially in terms of the character and resilience and the emotions and beauty of the people who did not survive, and those also who did survive. But I think that a lot of that seems to be lost sometimes in the literature in terms of looking at it in a rather, shall I say, sterile fashion. And I think bringing about some of those, particularly that I want to say again that deep, speaking now as a psychoanalyst, is the deep, actually Jewish values that I think we need to be able to share those more in the world. We also feel very tragically sad about what's happening in Israel right now, and in Palestine, but in the Gaza. But I think that so many people we encounter don't really have a sufficient understanding of the Israel, the history of Israel, nor do they have an understanding of really Jewish ethics, Jewish values, many things. And so I just somehow feel that we need, all of us need to be able to, in our world, whatever our world may be, we need to be able to teach, to share more, to communicate more, and to actually achieve something that this particular psalm meant a significant amount to me, because even as a young child, I thought, how come there is so much conflict and division? And I began very early to feel this sense of social justice. I have to go out and create more justice in the world. At the same time, behind that justice was a sense of peace. Like, we can all be together. We can all create things together if we have a basic feeling of respect, and a basic feeling of regard, and a feeling that, as Deidre was saying earlier, this sense of union and unity, that we all are one. And I think that that's really all I'd really like to share, and also to thank you so much for extraordinary Psalms class. We just have feel very, very blessed to be here. So thank you.
I must add that she left out that she's
okay. I've sung this because of Leonard, the Chester Palms. So I have sung this a number of times, so it has another meaning. But
And a final comment about the rabbi, it's wonderful how he does his interpretations by drawing on so many commentaries,
Yes.
and the erudition is very astonishing. And most important of all, I think, is the way he goes from the whole to the part, because in hermeneutics, it's very difficult to try to interpret a piece or a thing by itself. And the only way to make it understandable is by showing how it relates to the whole. And he draws upon the whole of his learning to illustrate how this meaning appears not only in one place, but throughout the Hebrew Bible. And I think this is a fabulous way of teaching.
I'm deeply honored, Robert and Irina, by your contribution to our learning today. And I just want to say to each of you, when we've had a chance now on the screen to honor most of you in terms of an individual psalm, is to bring people into the foreground. And it is deeply moving to know what an extraordinary self-selected group it is that comes together to study Psalms. I would not be as motivated to do the preparation I do if I did not have you to share it with. So my gratitude to each of you.